The story of Eric Butterbean Esch is unlike anything boxing fans had ever seen before. When he first stepped into the ring, he didn't look like the kind of man built to survive in a sport dominated by sculpted athletes, towering heavyweights, and chiseled warriors whose very physiques intimidated opponents before the opening bell. He was round, unassuming, and often mocked for his appearance. Yet beneath the layers of ridicule and disbelief, there was something his opponents would discover too late. Eric Esch was a natural-born fighter, a man who carried terrifying knockout power in both fists and who never cared about looking like an athlete as long as he fought like one. That contrast between appearance and reality created the myth of Butterbean, and time again, it was the arrogant giants who underestimated him who paid the price with brutal knockouts. At the dawn of his career, Butterbean came across a man who looked like his own reflection distorted through steroids and vanity. This opponent was a bodybuilder who thought brute strength, bulging muscles, and raw physical presence would be enough to overwhelm the man mocked as the king of the four-rounders. When the referee called them to action, the bodybuilder lunged forward, attempting to treat Butterbean like a barbell to be lifted. But Eric was no weight plate. He was an immovable wall of determination. The moment fists began to fly, the muscle-bound opponent realized strength was nothing without fighting instinct. Seconds later, Butterbean's punches landed flush, and Paul Springer, the man who had entered the ring with the arrogance of a Greek statue, was sent crashing into dreamland. One knockout, one warning. Butterbean was here, and anyone who underestimated him would pay. As the millennium turned, Butterbean faced another colossus in George Lindberger. On paper, the fight looked like another mismatch. Lindberger had the height, the frame, and the supposed athletic edge. He strutted into the ring confident, thinking he was about to make short work of the pudgy figure standing across from him. But fights are not won on appearances, and Butterbean didn't need long to prove it. The bell rang, and before the spectators even had a chance to settle into their seats, Butterbean delivered his trademark thunder. A perfectly timed right hand crashed into Lindberger's jaw, erasing all of his confidence in an instant. The fight ended almost as soon as it began, with the giant flattened like a fallen oak tree. But not every battle was so swift. In 1999, Butterbean met an opponent that looked like a wall of muscle and menace, Jackie Beard. When the two men stood in opposite corners, Beard wearing black trunks and Butterbean standing with his familiar round frame, even the spectators whispered their doubts. Could Butterbean withstand such a powerful specimen? At first, the fight seemed to confirm the crowd's worst fears. Beard controlled the early exchanges, his reach and strength pressing Eric backward. Blow after blow landed, and it looked as though Butterbean would be smothered under the weight of his opponent's assault. But Beard made a critical mistake. With success came arrogance, and arrogance led him to mock the man in front of him. He taunted Butterbean, dismissed his punches, and laughed as though he was untouchable. That kind of disrespect was gasoline on the fire inside Butterbean. From being laughed at for his body to being doubted for his conditioning, Eric had carried mockery his entire career, and Beard's arrogance pushed him over the edge. The change was instant. Butterbean stormed forward like a predator, unleashing wild, heavy-handed combinations that forced Beard against the ropes. Suddenly, the tide had turned, and the man who once mocked was now struggling to breathe under the storm of punches. Then came the moment of truth. Butterbean's right hand, nicknamed by fans his cholesterol cannon, detonated across Beard's jaw. The giant collapsed to the canvas, completely destroyed by the very man he had ridiculed only moments before. The crowd roared in shock and delight. Another giant punished, another lesson written in pain. Of course, not all of Butterbean's foes fought fair. Early in his career, he stepped into the ring against Doug Norris, a towering opponent with the physique of a bodybuilder. From the opening bell, Eric showed no hesitation. He charged forward, swinging punches like a man possessed, pushing Norris backward, smothering his reach. But just as Butterbean began to seize control, the dirty side of Norris was revealed. When the bell sounded, instead of stepping back, Norris sneaked in an extra shot, attempting to rattle Eric illegally. The crowd gasped in disgust at the foul, but Butterbean didn't complain. He didn't whine to the referee. He stored that moment like fuel, waiting for his chance to make Norris regret it. And when the fists flew again, Eric unleashed vengeance. With a barrage of hooks and overhands, he forced Norris into a turkey-shaped collapse, crumpled on the canvas as though served up for a holiday feast. It was brutal, poetic justice, an unfair, cheap shot repaid with a knockout so definitive the fight world never forgot. In 1996, Butterbean faced Jonathan Whitfield, another giant who believed his reach and size would neutralize the smaller, rounder opponent. Early on, Whitfield used his jab, keeping Eric at bay, looking as though he would dictate the entire fight. But the thing about Butterbean was simple. He didn't need 12 rounds. He didn't even need 6. He only needed one opening. And when Whitfield overcommitted, Butterbean pounced. He hammered Whitfield with a furious sequence of punches, smearing him across the canvas like paint on a wall. The final blow was devastating, lifting Whitfield off his feet and sending him crashing down like Humpty Dumpty. Another scalp collected, another opponent who thought size alone could conquer heart and power. Yet Butterbean wasn't confined to boxing alone. By the mid-2000s, he was hungry for new challenges, and so he entered the brutal world of mixed martial arts. In 2007, wearing the smaller gloves of MMA, Butterbean squared off against James Thompson, a towering, muscle-bound monster who had shared cages with men like Alexander Emelianenko, Bob Sapp, and Mariusz Pudzianowski. Thompson was fearsome, but intimidation only works if the man across from you feels fear. Butterbean feared no man. As the fight began, Thompson rushed forward, but Butterbean, calm as ever, planted his feet and launched a counterattack. The fist that had sent countless boxers into unconsciousness now tore into Thompson's defenses. Blow after blow landed, until finally, Butterbean's power overwhelmed even this MMA giant. The referee had no choice but to stop the carnage. Once again, a man with every physical advantage was humbled by the sheer willpower and punching force of Butterbean.